Hey guys, it's podcast of the day and the CrossFit Games has just happened. Super exciting weekend. And of course, because we previewed it, we've also got all the reaction and review for you as well. So I'm joined by Brian Friend, who you knew from our preview show. Hey Brian, how you doing? How was your weekend?
It was excellent. It's one of my favorite weekends of the year. This year, obviously, little different format and feel to it, but nevertheless, we got to see some of the fittest athletes in the world do some super impressive stuff.
What did you enjoy most? What was your highlight, if you could pick one?
Man, that's a difficult question.
Yeah, throw it right in there early.
Highlight of the weekend. Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't get to watch all the events in the way I'm used to watching them. And a lot of times a highlight for a weekend is like just an epic finish or a close battle, I would say. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of this, that just the margins for error across the board that kept athletes in and out of this eventual live five situation that we have this year are so small. It's amazing to me that the margins could be that fine when all of the athletes were doing the events blind.
Yes, we'll talk about the live five, which I love, by the way. I've not heard, I enjoy that little quote later on. But like you mentioned, all the athletes came into this completely unknown to what was happening around them. It very much was competing against yourself to be the best you can possibly be. Did you see that as fitting into the ethos of CrossFit somewhat?
I would have to say yes. I mean, there was a 2 or 3 year period of time where, because of the work I was doing at the time, it was difficult for me to get to a box. And during that time, I bought all the equipment that I needed and set up a garage gym. And, I even referenced some of the original articles in CrossFit.com's history, from the early 2000s about what should I have in my garage gym. And this is something that from really 2001 or 2, when CrossFit.com first started putting workouts out, until probably 2009 to 12 area. That's how, that for that 8 to 10 year gap, that's how most people were doing CrossFit. Was following along online, doing the workouts in their own gym, posting the results and seeing how they did compared to everyone around the world. So in a sense, the message that CrossFit sent out this weekend of kind of getting back to our roots, getting back to the box, and having an environment that's kind of a throwback to what this thing used to be for any of the big productions that we're used to now. Certainly there was an element of that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we're in such an era of change as well. And with Eric Rosa coming and taking over, it's almost like they have just set that reset button with this games, although I totally appreciate it was forced because of COVID. When we last spoke, we didn't know the workouts.
No.
So what was your initial reaction when you saw the workouts come out?
Several. And in light of what we just said, it's another homage to the history of CrossFit. Dave and the team there chose to have variations of 4 classic CrossFit workouts, and then the other 3 tests were each representative of the 3 kind of pillars of what makes up a typical CrossFit workout or set or training session in terms of monostructural gymnastics and weightlifting. So across the totality of this 7-test competition, you had 3 individual tests, each hitting one of the domains that's typically associated with CrossFit, and 4 classic workouts. Granted, there's a twist on those workouts, which of course there needs to be to test the best in the world. And so once again, not only are we doing this throwback in terms of location and feel of competing against people without necessarily knowing how they're doing or who they are, but also doing, CrossFit in kind of its purest form.
So what did you make of the workouts specifically?
So, apart from that, there was something that jumped off the page immediately to me. And I actually did a kind of a breakdown or a case study of just Tia Claire Toomey's workouts from this weekend that illustrates this really well. So we'll just approximate that the 1 rep max front squat takes 8 seconds to do 1 rep of a front squat. And then it took her 3 minutes and 40 seconds, 2 minutes, 28 seconds, 3 minutes, 21 seconds, 1 minute, 18 seconds, and 8 minutes and 1 second to do the other workouts, which if you add all of those times up combined is 18 minutes and 56 seconds. Of course, I'm omitting one workout, which was the Nasty Nancy workout that took her 18 minutes and 26 seconds. So that one workout took just as long as the other 6 workouts combined for her to do. And I'm sure if you looked at all the other athletes, it'd be similar, where you're basically saying that from a time perspective, it was 6 times out of 7 was important to test something that was 8 minutes or less. And in 5 times out of 7, something that was 4 minutes or less. And that those 6 tests combined to add up to the total time that was tested in the last workout, which to me is not true to the model of CrossFit, where there should be a broader range of tests from a time perspective. It's, one of the parts of the definition of CrossFit is across broad times and modal domains. So it's great that you have a 10-second event and a 3-minute event and an 8-minute event, 18-minute event, but you're missing that 10 to 15-minute range, which is basically a classic CrossFit. If you go to most CrossFit gyms around the world, the workout of the day is almost always, or like 3 times out of 5 on a week going to fall into a 10 to 15 time domain. These athletes weren't tested in that time domain at all. And then always at the games, and it really should be part of a well-rounded training program in the fittest on earth, you want to see them go long. I was hopeful that they'd have an event that was 30 or 40 or 50 minutes long. When they give them these big 3-hour windows, you could easily have programmed one event instead of having, Annie be the only event in a block. You could have had Saturday morning have a long event and had 2 shorter events that afternoon and hit that modality a little bit more. So I would say that from a programming perspective, that was probably a miss, was just the diversity of time domains. I'm sure that Dave and the guys who made that decision were aware of that, but from someone who's just evaluating it and trying to see, did they test everything that was needed to, first of all, rank athletes 6th through 30th as the 6th through 30th fittest on earth, because that's what they're labeled as for this year based on this test, but also to find 5 athletes who are deserving and worthy to go to California and finish out this test, where they will likely be tested in time domains that weren't yet tested here. And so once again, in 2020, we're asking some of the same questions in 2019, which is, we're halfway through the competition here. Have we tested enough to eliminate whatever percentage of the field?
I am so glad you said that, because that was the main thing that struck me when I was watching what I was watching over in the UK, was how brief all of the workouts seemed. And you came out of it, bar Nasty Nancy, thinking, have we really tested these guys enough to be able to say that these are the top 5 people? I am also going to throw at you, I don't think, and I know it's all classic CrossFit and that was the beauty of it, and outside maybe the handstand hold, did we do enough complex movements to show off athletes who traditionally would have been ranked high in previous CrossFit Games? Like that, it's a bit different looking at the women's. So I think the women's, when I look at the overall top 5, look like I would kind of expect, but particularly in the men's, that was a bit of a shock. And I think that was because a lot of the men train for very high gymnastic, heavyweight combinations, which we didn't really see.
Yeah, I'd say from first of all, from a gymnastics perspective, it was, there was chest bar pull-ups, and that was the only time they were on the pull-up bar. I was expecting at least 2 times that they'd go to the pull-up bar, a chest to bar and a bar muscle up, or a bar muscle up and a toes to bar, at least 2, maybe all 3 of them to show up. There was only the 2. There's only the 1, the chest to bar. And apart from that, the only gymnastics you had both required you to go upside down with the strict handstand push-ups and then the handstand hold, which certainly the handstand hold, people wanted to talk about that, and everyone was kind of curious to see what would happen. First of all, I was super impressed. I thought that 1 minute might win it. And, obviously Katrin's a super outlier here, but nearly 3 minutes in a 4x4 box in your hands, that's world-class.
Unbelievable. It was amazing to watch.
In terms of the athletes who qualified, yeah, so on the women's side, it was, there was certainly some basically one major surprise, which was Sarah Sigmazar's performance, which we can maybe talk about if we want to. But I thought there were about 15 athletes that had a legitimate chance to qualify for the women. I thought that it would be dependent on programming. What actually surprised me was an element of the programming we haven't talked about yet. It was kind of a heavy power output test on the surface. When you talk about a heavier deadlift, a slightly heavier thruster, a slightly heavier overhead squat, a slightly heavier clean, the 1 rep max front squat, and the 1,000 meter row, all of which are testing either power or strength at a slightly elevated level to what we're used to. You would think that he would have favored the historically stronger athletes, but once we finally got down to it, we actually had 3 girls make the top 5 who finished 22nd or worst in the 1 rep max front squat, including Haley and Katrin, who were 26 and 27, so nearly last. And what you end up seeing here, and I'm actually happy about this, and it's a perfect throwback to, since this year we're going to finally get a woman from America back on the podium. Since 3 of the 5 made it, there has to be one who gets on the podium. And that'll be the first time since 2014, which was Julie Fouche. What Julie Fouche is very well known for, which I think some of these girls, in particular Haley and Katrin, are also very good at, is that they're really, really good at moving 80 to 90% of their 1 rep max. And they can do it over and over and over again. So even though they're 70 and 80 pounds behind some of these girls on the 1 rep max front squat, they can still move the barbell that's 80% of their personal 1 rep max front squat, which may only be 60% of Tia's, but they can move it almost as well. That's what Julie was good at. And when Chris Hinshaw started working with her years ago, he was astounded by that. He said he'd never seen an athlete like that. I think Haley Adams is a very similar. So you give her a moderate to heavy barbell for her that she can move, and she can move it a lot of times quickly, which is obviously a very important element of fitness, as was demonstrated by her results this week.
So when you look at those top 5s, what stands out?
Well, I've got the men and the women in the top 5 pulled up here next to each other, and it's actually kind of, I see some parallels to start. Obviously, Tia and Matt are, in a class of their own. We could spend an hour talking about how impressive what they did this weekend was and not run out of things to say. I think that we'll have plenty of more opportunities to talk about them in a month when they probably do the same thing and end up setting a new record for the women and a new record overall for the men in terms of consecutive victories. So, true to form, and it shouldn't be said lightly. Like when Matt was asked, how do you continue to do this over and over again? His response was very simple. And he said, I train my ass off. And he didn't have to say anything else. Like, if you've spent any amount of time watching him train, then you know what that means. And that's not to say that the other people aren't training as hard, but they work really hard to get the results that they get. Certainly, they probably have some genetic predispositions to excel at this stuff that the rest of us wish we had. But yeah, super impressive.
And I guess it's not anything like the fact that both Tia and Matt train together and they're both at the top. They obviously play it off each other's training workload. I mean, that's not a coincidence that they're both top of the pile when it comes to games time.
No, I mean, Matt's had, I always talk about how great the environment that Matt has in his life. I mean, first of all, Sammy is a huge, huge plus in his corner. But I think that the relationship that he's developed with Tia and Shane, her husband and their coach, is really unique and special and something that he couldn't have even planned for. But prior to that, he was training not with Katrin, but they were doing the same programming for a couple of years when she was the 2-time fittest on earth. Yeah, and that's ultimately, if you want to be the best, you got to go up against the best. And I think that they push each other in training every day in a way that few other people in the world would consistently be able to do. So yeah, they've got an incredible situation there in Tennessee, and it's obviously paying off for them.
Sorry, I completely interrupted your top 5 thought process.
No, it's a lot to talk about. So I don't mind a little break there. But moving down to the second place, you had Noah Olsen for the guys and Brooke Wells for the girls. Noah was someone that I was certainly expecting to see inside the top 5. I wasn't necessarily sure if he'd get second. A lot of people are now saying he's clearly the second fittest on earth. I would have to withhold judgment on that for now. I am actually planning to do a mini series of case studies on certain athletes who've done it notably poorly in the 2019 and 2020 CrossFit Games, but exceptionally well in the 2019 and 2020 sanctional seasons. Some of those athletes are, for the men, Brent Fukowski and Pat Feldner, and for the girls, Sarah Sigma's-Daughter, Sam Briggs, and Gabriella McGowan. So I haven't done those studies yet, but I thought 2019 was a fluke for those athletes, and now 2020, once again, they didn't make it, or they didn't do nearly as well as basically everyone expected them to do. So I'm going to try to figure out why. But that's not to take anything away from the fact that Noah showed up this weekend and did exactly what I'm sure he wanted to do, and what people were maybe hoping to see him do, coming off obviously the success he had last year at the games. So great job for Noah. I personally think that Brooke Wells' performance this weekend was the most impressive performance of any individual athlete. However, she was also the one who probably got punished the most harshly last year by the structure of the games. She was inside the top 10 for every single event until the 6th event when she stepped on the line in the sprint event, which, I watched that video a lot of times. It was a clumsy turn by her, and she did go outside of the boundaries, and very few athletes did that, so it was a mistake. The penalty that ended up costing her I thought was very egregious relative to the error that was there, and I think she was probably one of the 5 fittest women on earth last year and didn't get a chance to show the world that. This year she does that. She made sure that she gets that chance. So I'm very, very happy for Brooke. She's like right in her mid-20s right now, which I think is the optimal and prime age for a woman, especially a woman who has as much experience and training age, what we call training age, as she does. So I think Brooke is in a super, super good place. She's got some really good training partners that weren't part of this year's games. Will Morad and Street Horner have been training with her, and they've been training hard. And once again, it really paid off for her this weekend. So I'm super happy for Brooke and impressed with what she did this weekend. Maybe you want to comment on either Noah or Brooke. I don't know.
No, you're all good. So on the men's side, the first one that really stood out was Justin Madeiros.
Yeah.
He is a Canadian youngster.
Well, he lives in California. He's from the U.S.
Oh, he's a US youngster. Why did I think he was Canadian? I don't know. Anyway, he won the Sanctional at Filthy 150, but he's only 21 according to his CrossFit bio, which
Correct.
Is very, external to Haley Adams, who's been on the scene a while, really, really young to be playing with these big boys and as a rookie.
Yeah. I was talking to Tommy Marquez and Sean Woodland before the games, and told them that one of my biggest disappointments from the canceled sanctional season this year was that we didn't get to see Justin Madeiros at the West Coast Classic, because I was in Ireland for the Filthy 150. I actually had a chance to call some of the action there with Mads Jacobson, and he was phenomenal. Tommy and Sean were also there, and all of us were just blown away by this guy. We knew he had some potential because as an 18 and 19 and 20-year-old, he'd already been making some waves in the regionals when those were still a thing. But that was the first time, and he did really well actually at the Granite Games the previous season. But that was the first time where I was like, whoa, like this guy is no joke. He did well on long events, short events, complex events, isolated events. When the pressure was on, like, his mental game was very strong. He was presenting himself very well in interviews. He's coached by Adam, I always get his name wrong, Niffler, the guy from Fort Vancouver who's got like 8 years games experience as a team. He was a coach of USA in the Invitational one year. So he's got a good support system. He's got an incredible athleticism. But what you have to have in CrossFit, and I think is really true for all the athletes who qualified here, is you have to have a certain mental, I'm not even sure the right word for it, but tenacity, ferociousness, that just like turn off your mind and get the work done and find a way to do that when your body's telling you not to do it. And he has that. I thought he had a chance. Actually, once the events got released, I even said to Tommy, I was like, dude, these events look good for Justin Madeiros. He might actually have a chance to make it in. And sure enough, he does. And he does so in a super impressive way. I'm just looking at his results here. His worst result was 19th in Dam Diane. He was 15th in the row, but as you said earlier, the margins were super small in some of these events. And then he had a second, a third, and a fourth place finish. He was he actually beat Matt Fraser in one workout, so that's always a little bonus. It was a front squat. He squatted 12 more pounds than him, but so Justin Madeiros, very impressive. If you don't know who he is, you're going to want to know who he is, because I think as long as he wants to, he can be competitive in this sport for a decade.
And he has a decade to play with, which is why it's so exciting. A lot of people don't anymore.
That's exactly right.
I guess looking at the women in general, I didn't look at that list and I wasn't particularly surprised by any of them. They're all names that you regularly see up there or thereabouts, whether it's Sanctionals, past, previous games. But the men threw a few other names into the mix, and for me, Jeffrey Adler really stood out, despite being exceptional in the Open and being a surprise name in the Open. I didn't expect him to be at this level of competition at the CrossFit Games. Also, it's the second time, and the first time was, midfield.
Yeah, and that was last year, was his first time at the games, which I would say if last year was your first year at the games, you didn't really get a full, games experience the way that most games rookies would.
No, you just got lots and lots of stress.
Yeah, and probably a very few number of events. I mean, the reality is that even multi-year games veterans and games podium athletes only got to do half the events last year, whereas in years past, almost the majority of the field would get to do at least 75% of the weekend. But yeah, actually, I'm wearing CrossFit Wonderland t-shirt today.
I did notice.
This is his gym in Montreal, and I was up at the Atlas Games when COVID took over the world, and I ended up being there for 3 days.
And they had to cancel it when you were all set up.
Right. So I spent some time with Jeffrey Adler there, and his girlfriend Caroline, who's also his coach, and they own the gym, CrossFit Wonderland. Got to train there with them. But I've spent some time with them actually around different competitions, Wadapalooza last 2 years ago, Dubai this past year. Actually had a really nice breakfast with him and Alexander Caron that 2 hours we just sat down and talked for a while. So I know them pretty well. Jeffrey Adler is one of those guys who can move a barbell and move a barbell really well. Obviously everyone saw him do 20.4 where he had this phenomenal time, beat Fraser by over a minute, and Fraser was second in the world. And actually when they announced Awful Annie and the barbell weight at 275 for the men, he was bummed out it wasn't 315. But, moderate weight barbell with some chest bar pull-ups in the first workout, that's going to be just fine for him. He finished 6th. Front squat, he's very strong. As you see he was doing those squat cleans at 315 in the Open last year with no lifters on, no knee sleeves on, no wrist wraps, no nothing. He just brute raw strength. So he took another top 10 finish in the front squat. His worst finish was in the handstand hold, which is kind of it is what it is type of a thing. He did 6th in the Nasty Nancy workout, which is phenomenal, and 9th in Awful Annie. And those are the 2 workouts I'm looking at as the closest replications to actual games event from the 7 that we had. Not that the other ones aren't good tests, but I really thought those tests were the best. And of course they were triplets, which is a little bit more robust, and you can't have all triplets. But I thought that, he did 6th and 9th in those. He had 4 top 10 finishes, and then 11th, 15th, and 1 blemish as a 27th. But overall, very consistent weekend. 5th in the Open last year, 5th in this competition this year, and an opportunity to represent Canada, which, a lot of people thought Canada would get a male or 2 there, but he probably wasn't the top pick for them.
Probably or wasn't?
No, it definitely was not.
Pretty sure he was not the top pick for Canada.
No, obviously Pat Feldner was the one everyone was expecting to see. I also have a good relationship with Pat, and
you love the Canadians. You're in the wrong country.
Well, the cliche about Canadians might just be nice. They're very friendly people. But I did do one of the things that people have been talking about in general is how small the margins for error were this weekend. And I thought Pat was actually a great example of this because Pat finished 9th. That's not really that close to making it. On the women's side, everyone saw that there was only a 5-point gap from 5th to 8th. And you knew it was close. Pat was 9th, 4 spots out, but only 15 points out. And I just was curious. So 1 second on Friendly Fran cost him 3 points. 0.7 seconds on the row cost him 12 points. And 2 seconds on the handstand hold cost him 8 points. And I already told you he only missed by 15 points. So any 2 of those 3 things, as long as he would have got the row 7/10 faster, and either one of the other things by 1 or 2 seconds, he would have been going to the games or going to the top 5. So it wasn't a terrible weekend for Pat, but he also didn't have any finish better than 6th. So he knows that he needs to have, more finishes in the first, second, third, top of the, with the scoring system the way it is, and he just didn't have that. All he really needed was 1 top 3 finish, and everything else the same, he would have made it. So I would say, as close as it was, this is a case where you got to look at Pat Feldner this weekend and maybe some of the other athletes who were close and saying, you didn't have that one event that you needed to make up for some of the other weaknesses. So I don't think it was my first feeling is that, Pat just didn't do well enough this week. It wasn't that it was an unfair test or it was bad for him or whatever. He just didn't do as well as you needed to do to make it.
Before we go and break down a couple of the tests a little bit more, have you seen Ricky Gerard's attempts at the workouts, and what do you make of that entire scenario?
I only saw his attempt at Friendly Fran, which was just under 4 minutes, it looked like. And I'm not sure if he knew all of the exact distances and had his barbell set up.
Yeah, he didn't do it like
did.
to the same T as I think the athletes were, but it's a pretty ballsy move, isn't it?
Well, this is what I'll say about Ricky Gerard. You kind of have to just say, like, it seems to me, and I don't know him or his brother very well, that they're not the smartest guys. Like, you should be able to, you shouldn't be failing a drug test at the games. Like, if you're doing steroids in the off season and whatever, like, that's one thing. And it's really, really difficult for CrossFit to regulate. And I don't have a lot of opinions about that. But if you're showing up to the top competition in the world and you're failing a drug test, like, that's just not smart. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. The fact that then his brother failed for the same thing a couple years later really doesn't do a lot for their reputation. Having said that, and it has to be said, I do think that this guy is probably, now the question is how much is he actually relying on performance enhancing drugs, but I think that he's probably one of the 20 fittest guys on the earth with or without performance enhancing drugs. The question is, how good is he really? And we might never know, because maybe he's just doing illegal things. But
it's almost frustrating that you have that much God-given talent and you throw it away by taking fucking performance enhancing drugs.
But he always does this. Whenever major competitions come up, he always does the workouts. Like when Rogue was happening, he was watching and doing the workouts at the same time as him, I think 2 years ago, or maybe even this year also. So he likes to do these workouts and compare himself to the athletes that are able to compete in the sport that maybe he wishes he was able to compete in right now. But what we have to also remember is he is going to be eligible to compete this upcoming season. So all these things that he's doing is great. Obviously, he's still training very hard, and he's very fit, regardless of how he's become so fit. This season, he'll have an opportunity to enter into the field once again. I'm sure that he'll be tested at every stage along the way. And my hope for him is that he's able to have a clean run this time around, and not just this year, but for multiple years, and that we can actually see a Ricky Gerard who's passing the same drug tests and the same circumstances as the rest of these men, how he stacks up. But other than that, I don't have too much to say about Ricky. I mean, he's served his suspension now. He's hopefully learned a lesson. And if we see him again, hopefully it'll be under more positive circumstances.
So breaking down the workouts over the weekend, Ricky aside,
right?
Nice controversial topic of conversation there. Things kicked off Saturday morning, Friday night. I don't even know when they kicked off. Sometime over the weekend at multiple different time zones with Friendly Fran. 3 rounds, 21 thrusters, 21 chest to bar pull-ups. For the women, that was 38.5 kilograms. For the men, 52 kilograms. I'm not going to say the pounds because they mean nothing to me and they mean nothing to the people of the United Kingdom. You know what the pounds are. I mean, looking at the people who did well in this and the people who actually smashed it. It's the first time we saw Fraser set a marker. He smashed it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact
it was impressive.
It's incredibly impressive. If you haven't watched the video of him doing this workout, it's worth it to go watch at least the last round, because the rate that he's moving the thrusters, and honestly, the rate that he's cycling chest bar pull-ups, it's so fast. It's mind-blowing. But we shouldn't be surprised that he beat everyone in this workout. What I'm surprised about is the margin he beat everyone by. This workout is very similar to 19.5, which he did against Tia live in Miami that year, before anyone had done it, and everyone got to watch him do it, and still no one was able to beat him over the next 4 days. Testing and retesting, changing it. He never redid it, and his time stood. So thrusters and chest bar pull-ups, no one's beating him. That's like, no one's beating him. If you remember back to the games in 2018, there was a bicouplet events with the snatches, bar muscle ups, snatches, chest bar pull-ups. Willie Georges got first and second in those 2 workouts. He did not make the games this year, unfortunately, but he did do that workout, and he was just under 4 minutes. Again, maybe like Ricky. He had a very similar time to Ricky, and maybe the spacing of everything wasn't exact. But basically, those guys were just as good as the 2nd through 10th place guys that competed this weekend. And all of them were like 45 seconds to a minute behind Fraser, which is 20 to 25% of the total working time. And it's just mind-blowing that he can be that much better than everyone else.
It's definitely one of the themes that's come across the weekend was Fraser in the traditional CrossFit workouts obliterated competition. And
not just that, I have to give Tommy Marquez credit for this stat. This is a really cool stat. Of the guys who actually qualified to Aromas, so the other 4 guys, they had 28 opportunities, 7 workouts, 4 guys each, to beat him. And they beat him 3 times. They beat him by 2 seconds, 1.9 seconds, and 12 pounds. So
it's mental.
It's just, it's domination. There's no better word for it. He is dominating the field in every regard.
What I find interesting is actually coming into this is maybe the first year where people have really started going, "Ooh, I think Fraser's off the pace." Do you think there's an element of motivation there for him?
I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Justin Madeiros, the mental tenacity you have to excel in this sport. I think that, yes, Fraser's always looking for things to motivate him, but I don't think he necessarily needs them. I think he has the capacity to motivate himself. And if he didn't have that, he wouldn't be able to have performances like this over and over and over again. You can't be dependent on outside circumstances. You can certainly use it to help you, but he has that without it. Yeah, it was. People have already been giving Dave a hard time, Dave Castro, because he was basically calling out Fraser. Oh, he might be slipping up. And I think some guy posted a meme of Fraser on a slip and slide, saying this is the only slipping that Matt's doing these days. Dave.
Dave just likes a bit of a stir, though, doesn't he? He just wants to get the community talking.
Yeah, I mean, he said it himself. He thinks the community needs a villain, and he doesn't mind being the villain. So, whatever.
Brilliant. And we could talk about Tia dominating that one, but I think it was more impressive her dominating the 1RM back squat. Just not that she isn't considered a great weightlifter. She went and won gold at the Commonwealth Games in her Olympic lifts back in Gold Coast 2016. But to do a power lift like that at the weight that she is, off the back of outperforming everyone in the first workout, I thought was exceptional.
I think it was WAD Analytics is the person on Instagram. They did a study of 1 max front squats versus body weight for the women. And so Tia she squatted 142 kilos for the people there.
Thank you so much.
Which is 245% of her body weight ratio. The next closest by this metric was Christy Aromas, who did 213% of her body weight. So yeah. It's, because that's a test where you would just expect some of the bigger, mass moves mass is what they say. But she's not the heaviest woman in the field. She's about average across all the women competing. But she moved more weight than any of them, and by a pretty considerable margin. I think that a lot of people were looking at Danny Spiegel, Cara Sanders, Amanda Barnhart, maybe Laura Horvath as people who could threaten her in this workout. Now, Cara was 3rd, Danny Spiegel was 4th, Amanda was 5th. Like, they had impressive results, but when you especially look at the body weight to weight lifted, no one comes close to her.
And on the men's side, again, a couple of rookies rookie, isn't he? Griffin Roll?
Both the top 2 front squats for the men are both games rookies on the individual
level, yeah.
has some experience as a team.
But semi expected that you would have outliers in the men being able to lift the biggest weights. I would have thought that didn't necessarily come as a surprise, and if anything, probably nice to see a couple of new names topping a leaderboard for a change, as opposed to our usual kind of contingent of people.
Definitely. And this is what people want to see at the games. They want there to be certain tests. That's why they want to have a big test. 13 is kind of like the average number for classic CrossFit Games, 2014 to 2018. And it gives, what it gives is the opportunity for people like this to not just excel in the things that they're good at, but to shake up the points a little bit. Neither of these was a surprise that they lifted, that they were at the top of the leaderboard. Griffin Roll, he stood up 405 pounds from a clean the week before the games, and it basically looked like how I feel standing up 75 pounds. I was like, what is going on? Like, this is ridiculous. And 490 pounds, almost 500-pound front squat, and he's 33 pounds ahead of the second guy, Tyler Christoffel, who I knew he had a 450-pound front squat, so he just did a little better than that.
But I don't call him CrossFit Thor for nothing.
No, that's Griffin's Instagram, and he kind of resembles him, and certainly has the strength. I think he might be able to lift the hammer. I don't know.
So, Damn Diane. 3 rounds, 15 deadlifts, 15 strict deficit handstand push-ups. The weights for the women were 93 kilograms, for the men 144 kilograms, and the deficit for the women being 2 inches and 3.5 for the men. Again, we see Tia and Matt coming out on top. Outside of them, we've already discussed the fact that in classic CrossFit, they're pretty much excelling. Who stood out?
There's some girls that I expected to do really well on this, but the one who surprised me the most was Brooke Wells, who we already talked about. You know, she's just, if you watch her do handstand push-ups, she doesn't have the best technique. She has a huge arch in her back, which sometimes has cost her in the open when they have that stricter standard. Standards weren't as strict here and allowed her to use the technique, which is it's a legal technique that she has, to show that she actually can do handstand push-ups pretty well. She ended up taking 3rd place here behind only Tia and Carol-Ann Reason-Thibault, she's generally very good in these types of workouts. Carrie Pierce was right there, Kristen Holta, Kendall Vincelette, who's got some gymnastics background. So I think for almost all, if not all the athletes, the limiter was the strict handstand push-up here. Yes, the barbell looks heavy to us, but for them, especially if you just go watch any of the people who placed in the top 5 do these deadlifts, once again, it looks like they're moving the bar off the ground with, 300 or whatever kilos it is, the way that I move a bar that's 1/3 of that weight. And it's just crazy. So I don't think the deadlifts ended up being too much of a problem. It was just your capacity on the strict handstand push-ups. I was impressed with the women here. They seem to outperform the men on this workout. And you might say, well, range of motion could be the reason why. It's a smaller range of motion over the course of 90 reps. But their deficit was only 1.5 inches less than the men's. I thought that the men might have a greater deficit, because just in general, they're usually better at upper body pushing stuff. So I was very impressed with the women's field in general on this workout and relative to the men.
Any major surprises? I was looking at that and I was surprised that Dave Shrunky didn't perform in this particular workout. However, he did come out later and say that he had suffered a back injury that was flaring up again. This was BKG, only finished in 16th in 4:53. And that was the best part of a whole minute behind the top 5. Then on the women's side, at this point, where was Sarah Sigmundsdottir still? and Jamie Cinnamons, I thought.
Yeah, so you have just mentioned 3 of the 4 athletes who had the weekends that were significantly worse than what I expected. And the other one in that group is Saxon Panchik. Maybe people didn't have as big expectations for him as some of those other names, but I did, and he did not live up to that. I'm not entirely sure what to say about Sarah at this point. I don't think I'm not going to say anything for now. I want to go and take a look at some stuff like I mentioned earlier, and before I talk about her anywhere. BKG did finish 8th overall. He was 1 spot ahead of Pat. I didn't look at his numbers the same way I looked at Feldner's, but presumably the margins were small, and he was less than 15 points away from making it. He was actually 19 points. He beat Pat by 1 point. So, or 14 points. Sorry. Anyway, so BKG, it may have just come down to a couple seconds for him as well. And it's kind of unfortunate. He's probably, I still feel confident saying he's one of the 5 fittest guys in the world, at least in the past couple of years. But on this weekend, he wasn't. Jamie Simmons, she, like BKG, it's very surprising to me that she wasn't closer to the top. She ended up taking 12th. But with the exception of last year where she was 3rd, she's typically 8th to 12th at the games. Like if you look at the totality of her career from 2017 until now, so this is her 4th year, I think she's been 8th, 11th, 12th, and 3rd. So it's not a finish that's like super out of expectation for her. I don't know exactly what happened there, but yeah, when you're looking at BKG being nearly 2 minutes slower than Matt Fraser on Damn Diane, it just seems like a workout where there shouldn't be that big of a margin. That's like 40% of the total working time difference, and that is concerning to me.
So moving on to the 1,000-meter row, another nice little outlier of a workout. I love this one personally because it allowed you to see the differences between the CrossFit Games athletes and what an athlete in rowing would achieve. Mm-hmm. So I pulled out, I'm not a big stats person. I'm not great at stats, but I did pull out the world records for stats on this, just out of interest. And I only really compared Roman Krenikov because he was the person who was closest to hitting the mark. Mm-hmm. And a rower, 19 to 29 years old, in the heavyweight category, which he would fall into, rows 1,000 meters in 2 minutes 39 seconds 0.5. He rowed it in 2 minutes 48.9, and I know in rowing terms that's not massive, but it does give you a really good indicator of how close and how good these athletes are, even though it's not even a specialist subject or a specialist sport to them. So I loved watching Roman on this. He had a really, really crappy day one, and he managed to pull it out of the bag on the 1,000-meter row.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, the first 3 events that came up in the order, chronologically in order, are basically the worst events he could ask for. I predicted him to win the 1,000-meter row, and he did win it. The cool thing is, because I also checked yeah, right, okay, I got one. I got a lot of things wrong also, That's why they do the competitions. So Roman, like you said, was about 9 or 10 seconds off the world record. And I believe on the women's side, Karen Freyova was also about 10 seconds off the world record. I'm not sure if you have that.
I have the women's here. She was, very close. 4 seconds off the world record. Assuming she's a heavyweight woman.
Oh, for her division, I think the world record's 3:04 and hers time was 3:14.
Oh, over in the UK, I have 3:11. Ooh, where are we getting our stats from?
I have to remember where I found that.
I was using Concept 2's indoor rowing stats, but hey.
Oh, I know I actually know where I got that from. Was from Adrian Bosman, who put a little thing out there. So, who knows?
Well, we tried. We tried.
It's definitely true. Is that these are athletes who, the CrossFit Games athletes are athletes whose specialty is not specializing, and yet we have a couple athletes here who are coming within 10 seconds at most of the world record for this event. Now, if you're not familiar with Concept 2 rowing, maybe you at least know what it means to run 800 meters on a track or a mile, because these are kind of like, it's in that realm where you're like basically sprinting for 3 to 4 minutes, and it really hurts. But it's difficult to shave time. So I tried this workout yesterday actually, and I'm happy to say that I beat all but 14 of the women. How about that?
Smashing it. They missed a trick with you, Brian. You should be on the demo team.
And it hurts. It's a painful workout. And now you're looking at just look at this. You're looking at the guys 4th through 7th. This is what I was talking about with Feldner. Feldner was 254.8. Travis Mayer was 4th, 5 places ahead of him, 254.1. And you knew that you were going to have this. You go down a little bit, you had guys literally tying to the 100th of the second in a couple different instances. And all of the men were within 20 seconds of each other, from 248 down to 308 being the slowest guy. And it's just, but when you're doing this test, if you've ever done it, one, it's going to hurt, and two, the margin for error is very small. And that's especially in a setting like this where it's like you don't even get to see the guy next to you pulling hard and has that motivation. Greg Glassman has a saying. He's like, look, if you're sitting in a gym and you're rowing by yourself, that's one thing. But as soon as one person walks over, you're going to start rowing 5% harder without even realizing what you're doing. That's the nature of competition. Yes, all the athletes had people cheering them on and whatever, but you're basically pulling for your life here at the end of a fairly intense, even though it wasn't a lot of time domain, a fairly intense day one, really taxing your nervous system when you know that tenths or hundreds of a second, in some people's cases, could mean a difference between tens of thousands of dollars, a lot of sponsorship opportunities, and the chance to compete in Aromas in a month. So there's a lot on the line in these kind of events. And like we've been saying, small time domains with which to prove yourself.
And that was also the first workout where we saw Matt Fraser not make top 5. Not necessarily a surprise, but still it's worth mentioning because he's in the top 5 for pretty much everything else.
Yeah, it was his only finish outside the top 5. He was 8th in that workout. When you look at the athletes who beat him, you can see, and even especially the athletes that he beat, like right behind him is Tim Paulson and David Schrunke, who are some big guys.
Schrunke's a former rower.
Yeah,
but he was niggling back problems. So
yeah, he was the only athlete on either side that eventually did have to withdraw from the competition. I think overall for David, this is probably a pretty bittersweet weekend, maybe more bitter than sweet. He'd been chasing the games for a long time. He'd been close a couple of times. He definitely earned the opportunity to compete in this field earlier this season. And for just to kind of know that he didn't have, his back just wasn't where it needed to be able to showcase the work he's been putting in, I'm sure is very tough for him. But I also think he's a very mentally strong individual. And I think that he'll be motivated by this to earn another opportunity to kind of redeem himself.
Nasty Nancy. So this was day 2's first workout, and it was the longest workout of the weekend, and it gave us a chance to see what we were saying earlier, the athletes competing over just a longer time frame. Mm-hmm. So this was 5 rounds, 500-meter run, 15 overhead squats, 15 bar facing burpees at a weight of 56.5-ish kilograms for the women and 84 kilograms for the men, pending my maths when it comes to pounds to kilograms. So, I mean, that could be a little loose.
That sounds right to me. It's pretty close. It's, when you look at this workout, I have the men up here on the screen right now, and you start to look at the people who place towards the top, and these are the types of names that you'd expect to see regularly at the top of CrossFit Games caliber workouts.
I agree.
Yeah, Matt Fraser, Justin Madeiros, and you could say the same for Awful Annie, which we'll get to. Chandler Smith, Roman Krennikov, BKG, top 5. And, obviously Justin Madeiros is a new name to a lot of people. Roman Krennikov is his first year able to compete at the games, but everyone kind of knows who he is. Chandler Smith, Fraser, BKG, like these are, compared to some of the other ones, you have a test here that's got enough diversity to it. The time domain's long enough. The overhead squats are challenging enough. 5 by 500 meter run is no joke. And that's a mental thing to be able to do that by yourself and know what pace you're going to hold. You don't have anyone else there on the track with you. You don't know how fast these other guys are running. 5-round workouts are dangerous workouts. And now when you're talking about competing blindly against 29 of the other best in the world, but you get some, really impressive results from the guys that I would hope to see here. The names I didn't mention on the men's side that I was actually kind of very shocked to see do this badly on this workout are Brent Fukowski and Pat Feldner. I mean, you think about the first cut workout at the games last year. Feldner took a risk, and he knows it, and he's admitted it, to try to beat Fraser in that workout. He could have gone conservatively and taken second in that workout. Well, what was the workout? It was running legless rope climbs and squats snatches at 185. This was running overhead squats at 185, which is almost the same as squat snatches, and burpees instead of legless rope climbs. So there's no reason Pat should be falling behind on burpees by that much. He's obviously capable of running and moving that barbell better than almost anyone in the world. So I would be curious to know what happened to him on this workout. Brent has also done pretty well on workouts in this time domain that have some running involved. He shouldn't have a problem with the overhead squat. I can understand him being a little bit slower on burpees, but to finish 3 minutes behind Fraser on this workout, just something doesn't seem right about that for Brent. And some of the guys that beat him, I think he would look at that and be like, man, I think I could do better on this workout. Looking at the girls' side, it's kind of more of the same. This was the start of Katrin Davidsdottir, who we haven't mentioned yet, making a really impressive comeback. Her day one wasn't terrible. She obviously did really bad on the front squat, but she knew she wouldn't do well on that. 12th, 11th, and 4th on the other 3 workouts. But now she comes in and wins this workout, whereas most people are probably looking at Sam Briggs, Kristen Holt, Tia-Claire Toomey as the favorites to win this one. She beats them all. Kristen was second. Tia was third. We haven't talked about Sam yet, but I'm guessing, I haven't watched, but I'm guessing she just struggled with the barbell here. I can't imagine burpees or running slowing her down. I haven't heard anything. Maybe you have. I don't know if she has any injury problems or not. I think she's like proud at her age to finish 25th, to be the 25th woman in the world. And I think that's a great perspective, like that, people can appreciate. So this was a super impressive workout for Katrin. And it was, once again, though, after Tia, there's Haley, there's Brooke Wells, Christy Aramo, who we're used to seeing do well in these running workouts. So names that you'd expect to see. And that's what kind of is an indicator to me of this is more of a complete test. Whereas, obviously the 7 tests is good. If you wanted to just kind of pick 1 or 2 just to really find out who is going to excel, this is one of the ones I'd pick.
Talking of unbelievable performances by Katrin Davidsdottir, the handstand hold. I have never seen anything like that in my entire life. And the fact that she didn't even really move her planted hands for the best part of the first minute 30 was unreal.
Yeah, I've tried this workout now about 10 times in the last week.
What, 3 seconds?
Since I found out about
5
it.
seconds? 10 seconds? 20 seconds?
10 seconds is my best. 5
Mine's
seconds
3. I'm happy if I hit 5.
So, it's whatever. I've never been very good on my hands in general. The women, this is, I think I have the women's times up here. I think Noah Olsen was best for the men in 1:37, and there were 9 women who beat that. So, and
not
that's
a
cool.
men's game.
No, but you know what? I always love it when they have events that you can just compare the men to the women. There's nothing that says a woman should be better at this than a guy, right? But in this case, 9 of them were better than the best male athlete, and I think that's pretty cool. So,
and we closed off the entire. I honestly thought when all the workouts were announced, I honestly thought that they were going to hold something back and release it once you'd done the final one, like extend that goalpost once more, but it just never really came. So Awful Annie closed out the weekend, and it was around the 10-minute mark, wasn't it, for the athletes in terms of time. I'm not going to go through it totally because it's a lot of words to say, but it was a 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. But rather than sit-ups doing GHD sit-ups, you're doing double unders with a stupid heavy rope, and you're doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of a heavy clean.
Yeah.
And what did you think of it?
I also did this workout yesterday, and I took a glance at the clock after 2 rounds and realized Tia was already done with the workout.
No way.
and I used the women's weight, and I didn't use a heavy rope.
Oh no. Amazing.
But then I looked further down the leaderboard, and I realized I actually would have beat 3 of the girls. So
well done. You pat yourself on the back.
Like I said about Nasty Nancy, this is the other workout on the weekend. When you look at the kind of the top 5 or 10 women or men who finished this workout, now the names that you're expecting to see up there are up there at the top of the leaderboard. Tia, Cara, Brooke Wells, Haley Adams, Sarah Sigmundsdottir with, I believe, her only top 10 performance of the weekend, which again, there's just something about this that doesn't make sense, but I don't know what it is yet. Christy, Katrin Carey, Karen Freyova, and Amanda Barnard. So look at the top 10. All athletes who, if they finished in the top 10 on any given games weekend,
Yeah,
you wouldn't be
it wouldn't
surprised
look
by it.
different. Yeah, exactly.
So, and I like having this test at the end. There was an opportunity for athletes to make up some points or to give up some points and have some changing of this top 5 at the end of the day. You know, Carrie Pierce ends up taking the 5th spot. She got 8th in this workout at 9:46. Kristen Holta, who ends up missing the spot by 2 points, finishes 11th, only 3 spots worse in that workout. So it wasn't bad. It just wasn't quite good enough. And Kristen's already made a comment about this, so I'm not trying to make any excuses for her because I know she wouldn't want to. 2 seconds on that workout gets her to the 5th place position. And I'm sure you could look, there may even be smaller margins of error further back than that. But ultimately, Kristen said what I think everyone can appreciate as a very mature perspective is this is the nature of sport. You have to do what the competition tells you to do. You can do the best that you can, and sometimes the margins are super small.
I mean, the margins in that 5th place spot were so tight for the women, weren't they? Was it Kristen Holter finished on 449 points, Cara Saunders on 448, and Amanda Barnhart on 446, when Carrie Pierce was on 451. I mean, we're talking max 5 points separating those girls.
They actually had an amendment to Cara's score in the last workout, so her official score total was 444, but nevertheless, it's 7 points separating 4 girls for the final spot. So, okay.
I did update it, yeah.
It's
not the first time she's had an amendment, is it?
No, not at all. I was definitely thinking about that 2-2-2-3 interval workout from 2017. She had been listed as winning this workout with a time that was a minute faster than Tia's time. And I'm not even sure what happened, but someone caught something, and it ended up her time was actually almost a minute slower than Tia's, which was still 16 seconds faster than the 3rd place girl. So she took 2nd. It didn't end up affecting anything in terms of top 5. It allowed Amanda Barnhart to finish 1 spot ahead of her 7th instead of 8th, which obviously is a little bit of prize money implication there. But it was but this is, something that has happened in the past where sometimes they have to make changes. I don't know if they're still reviewing anything, if this is technically final or not, but it should be at this point. It's not uncommon to have a little scoring correction at some point during the course of the games weekend.
So on the men's side, what did you make of this final 5 on that Awful Annie workout?
Yeah, it ends up, also being one of these times where like Brent Fukowski all of a sudden gets 2nd place in this workout. He was 5th on the row, which you'd expect him to do well on the row, because I think he was 5th also on the marathon row. So, what was going on all weekend for you, Brent, that you had these 15th, 18th, 22nd place finishes and all of a sudden 2nd on the last event? So that's it's kind of like Sarah, I'm not really sure. But again, just the names in the top 10 here are the names that you'd expect to see, right? Fraser, Fukowski, Hepner, Madeiros, Cornway, Feldner, Quant, Lepanchik. These are the names that you'd think would be towards the top. And when it came down to the bubble, you were really, really looking at Adler and Chandler Smith. And Jeff Adler, I told you earlier, he wanted a heavier barbell here. So if the barbell certainly wasn't going to be an issue for him. He ends up taking 9th place in this workout, 1 second behind Chandler Smith, and Chandler was behind Saxon Panchik, and Chandler Smith was 2 places behind Jeff, taking 11th. So just like Kristen, he finished 11th in this workout, but just like Kristen, the person who needed to beat him by a couple spots, and that ended up being the difference. But I would say that's what you want to see by the end of the competition, is at some point, whether it's battle for 1st, battle for 3rd, battle for 5th, whatever it is, where there's athletes who know, like, I have to beat this person if I want to achieve my goal. And in this case, Jeff was able to go a little bit faster than Chandler. I think there's a lot of people that are feeling kind of a heartbreak for Chandler. He's a super, super, super popular, well-known athlete in the sport who represents a lot of the things that this community is about very well. But I would also say the same is true for Jeff Adler. He's just less well-known. And I wouldn't, I'm obviously very happy for Jeff. I feel for Chandler, but I think that both guys have a tremendous respect for each other as well as the rest of the competitors. And like Kristen Holta said, sports is tough. And we were talking about the best in the world. there's a fine line. Someone was pointing out something. A lot of these athletes forgot that they had to run across the line at the end of their workout. In the Friendly Fran workout, first workout of the weekend, Jeff Adler fell off his bar, and everyone's like, run across the line. And he did it, and it cost him 2 spots. But 1 more second would have cost him 1 more spot, and that spot would have kept him out. So, and I'm sure that there's little stories like this from all 30 athletes that we don't necessarily know about that, may actually have had way bigger implications than any of us know.
So it is worth reminding everybody, because it does feel like this is the foregone conclusion to a certain extent after the weekend, that this is only part 1 of a 2-part CrossFit Games this year. And the top 5 men and women will be heading to Aromas, that I formerly called Aromas for the best part of my life, to compete in probably what's we expect to be slightly more kind of CrossFit Games style events. But I guess at the stage we are now, I will leave you with this parting question, Brian. Are the games in this format doing their job of finding the fittest on earth?
Perfect question to round things out. So I did do an average event placement for all the athletes. And I think that there's been some questions over the years about the scoring system at the games. Like, why is it always changing? And it's changing and evolving and it's shifting and it's difficult to predict. You can take any games competition from the past, however many years there's been the games, and do an average event placement. And you would think that overall, in general, the person who places the highest across the events on average should be the fittest. And in the case of the men, that was the case. 1 through 5 were the top 5 in order, average event place finishes. For the women, it was the same, except for the 5th place and 6th place was actually a dead tie. Carrie and Kristen both averaged 9.75 as their event place finish over these 7 events. But historically, the tiebreaker goes to best event finish. They both had a second. We go to second best finish, which was Carrie Pierce's 4th compared to Kristen Holt's 5th and Dan Diane. So between these 2 girls, it literally couldn't have been closer. But by that metric, which is something that Chase Ingram and Bill Grundler often look at on Get With The Programming, and a lot of us who study this sport and try to, we're studying the sport to see, like, how can we improve it? That's a metric we often look at, and it checks out in this case. So we've talked about the fact that maybe the test could have been a little bit more diverse in terms of time domains. Maybe they could have snuck in an extra event there in the last window. But I think when you take a step back and you look at it, considering the state of the affairs in the world right now, considering the time frame with which HQ had to work in, considering the fact that these 30 athletes had to compete in 16 different countries across 20 different time zones or whatever it was, that they did a really good job when you factor in all of those things. Dave spends months programming for the games. He had 1 month to program for this. And I think that given all of that, it was a successful weekend.
Beautifully rounded off. Thank you so much, Brian, once again, for taking the time to sit down and chat with us. Honestly, it's awesome to hear your insight, and how you keep across all of those numbers is beyond me, but really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for this, Lauren. It was super fun. I enjoyed it.
Cool. We'll have you back for Aromas.
Okay, 1 month.
1 month.